For 9 years, the girl touched her ear. Every doctor said the same thing. Nothing we can do. Her father spent millions, threatened specialists, flew across 3 continents. They all shrugged. Then a black single mother in a grocery store noticed something no one else did. And what she pulled from that child's ear will leave you breathless. Josiah Huang was a ghost, the kind of man whose name you whispered, never spoke aloud. Korean Mafia boss. Criminal empire stretching from Seoul to Los Angeles. Private compounds, armed guards, more power than most people see in 10 lifetimes. But his daughter Nia was born deaf. 9 years old, never heard a sound. Josiah tried everything. Seoul National University Hospital, Tokyo Medical Center, specialists in Switzerland, doctors who charge tens of thousands per consultation. They ran tests, scans, experimental procedures. All of them said the same thing. Irreversible. Accept it. But Josiah couldn't accept it because Nia was all he had left. His wife died giving birth to that girl. So Josiah kept searching, kept spending, kept threatening anyone who said no. What he didn't know, the answer wasn't coming from a specialist. It was coming from a stranger he'd never look at twice. A woman buying cereal in the same grocery store on a Saturday morning. Karina Gregory was a widow, 31, Army medic turned hospital receptionist. Just a single mother trying to keep food on the table for her 12-year-old son. But she noticed something about Nia that every specialist had missed. Something in her ear, something dark. And in the middle of that grocery store aisle, with bodyguards watching and a dangerous father steps away, she made a decision that would either save the girl's life or end her own. What happened next? I need you to see it for yourself. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I believe this story found you today for a reason. The Huang penthouse stretched across the top 3 floors of downtown Los Angeles' most exclusive tower. From the outside, it looked like power. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows, security cameras on every corner, guards stationed at every entrance. But inside, silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that feels like rest. This silence was heavy, suffocating, like something had died and no one dared speak its name. Men in dark suits moved through the marble hallways without speaking. Their footsteps were deliberate, careful. They'd learned quickly. Mr. Huang didn't tolerate noise. No music played in that penthouse, no television chatter, no laughter echoing off the walls. Just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a father was drowning. Josiah Huang stood by the window most evenings, staring at the photograph on his desk. There she was, Ji-yoon, his wife, her smile captured forever in that frame, her eyes still warm, still full of life. Next to her, a younger version of himself, looking certain, looking unbreakable. And between them, Nia, barely a month old in the photograph. Before Josiah understood that his daughter would never hear her mother's name, Ji-yoon died the day Nia was born. Hemorrhaging, the doctors called it. Too much blood, too little time. Josiah held her hand while the light faded from her eyes. She'd been trying to say something, her lips forming words in Korean, but no sound came out, just like their daughter would be. Silent. Josiah never forgave himself. If he'd taken her to a different hospital, if he'd demanded better doctors, if he'd been less arrogant about his own invincibility, maybe she'd still be here. Maybe Nia would be different. The guilt sat on his chest like a weight he couldn't move, couldn't escape. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He spent money, millions of dollars, the best specialists on earth, private jets to Seoul, Tokyo, Zurich, New York, hospitals that cost more per day than most people earned in a year. Every doctor said the same thing. Your daughter's deafness is congenital. There's nothing we can do. You need to accept this. Accept it. How could he accept that his girl would live in silence forever? How could he accept that Nia would never hear him say, "Your mother loved you more than anything"? How could he accept that all his power, all his connections, all his money meant nothing when it came to the one thing that mattered? So Josiah kept searching, kept writing checks, kept making threats when promises failed. He didn't realize the answer wasn't coming from a specialist. It was coming from someone he'd never think to notice. Someone who was about to walk down the same grocery store aisle with nothing but a mother's eyes and a medic's memory. Her name was Karina Gregory, and she was about to change everything. The call came at 2 a.m., like most calls in Josiah Huang's world. A warehouse in Long Beach. A shipment that didn't add up. 3 men who needed to learn what happened when you stole from the wrong organization. Josiah listened to the details in Korean, his voice flat, emotionless. He gave his orders. Clean, quiet, done by sunrise. Then he hung up and walked down the hallway to Nia's room. She was sleeping, finally. It had taken hours. She'd been touching her ear again, that small hand pressing against the side of her head like she was trying to push something out, or push something in. Josiah didn't know anymore. He stood in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting her breaths like he'd done every night since Ji-yoon died, making sure, always making sure. His daughter was beautiful. She had her mother's delicate features, her dark eyes, her small hands. But she lived in a world Ji-yoon would never know. A world without sound, without music, without her father's voice telling her she was loved. Josiah walked to the nightstand and picked up the photograph. Ji-yoon smiled back at him, frozen in that moment before everything shattered. They'd taken it at the hospital, just hours before Nia was born. Ji-yoon's hand rested on her swollen belly. Her eyes were bright, full of hope, full of plans for a future that would never come. She'd chosen the name, Nia. It meant purpose, she'd said. Their daughter would have purpose. She would be the good that came from Josiah's dark world. The light he didn't deserve, but would protect with everything he had. Then the hemorrhaging started. The doctors moved fast, but not fast enough. Josiah remembered the blood. So much blood. He remembered Ji-yoon's hand in his, growing cold. He remembered her lips moving, forming Korean words he couldn't hear over the chaos. Sarangi, I love you. Yuri Tel. Our daughter. And then nothing. Just the flat line and the doctor's voice saying, I'm sorry. We did everything we could. They hadn't done everything. They'd let her die, let his wife bleed out while his daughter came into the world silent. 2 women, one dead, one deaf, both lost to him. 9 years. 9 years of believing his life had cursed them, that the blood on his hands had somehow marked his family. That God, if there was a God, was punishing him for the things he'd done, the people he'd hurt, the darkness he'd chosen. So Josiah spent money, millions. He flew Nia to Seoul National University Hospital, where the top ENT specialists in Asia examined her. They ran every test, MRIs, CT scans, auditory brainstem responses, genetic panels. All of them came back the same. Congenital sensory neural hearing loss. Severe. Bilateral. Permanent. Mr. Huang, we understand this is difficult, the head specialist had said in careful English. But your daughter's condition is irreversible. No surgery can help. No procedure can restore what was never there. You must accept this and focus on her quality of life. Accept this. Josiah broke the doctor's nose. Security pulled him off before he could do worse. They'd banned him from the hospital. He didn't care. He went to Tokyo next. The Japanese specialists were more cautious. They'd heard about Seoul. They examined Nia gently, speaking in soft tones she couldn't hear, and delivered the same verdict with deeper bows. We're very sorry, Huang-san. There is nothing we can do. Switzerland, Germany, New York, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, every prestigious medical center that would see them, every specialist who charged obscene consultation fees. Josiah paid them all. He sat through their explanations, their brain diagrams, their apologetic head shakes. And every time the answer was the same. irreversible. Some of them were afraid of him. They'd heard the name Huang. They knew what it meant. They delivered their diagnoses quickly, professionally, eager to get this dangerous man out of their offices. Others pitied him. They saw a desperate father, not a criminal. They took their time, explained gently, offered support groups and resources for parents of deaf children. Josiah didn't want support groups. He wanted his daughter to hear, but nothing worked. Nothing changed. And slowly, over 9 years, Josiah stopped hoping for a miracle. He focused instead on protection, on control, on keeping Nia safe in a world that couldn't help her. He pulled her out of the special needs school after 6 months. Too many people, too many variables he couldn't manage. He hired private tutors instead. ASL specialists, speech therapists, academic teachers. They came to the penthouse, taught their lessons, and left. Nia learned. She was bright, quick, desperate to understand the world she couldn't hear. But she was alone, always alone. No friends, no playdates, no birthday parties with other children. Just Nia and her tutors and her father, who watched her sleep and counted her breaths and touched her mother's photograph and tried not to drown in the silence. The penthouse was a fortress, bulletproof windows, armed guards rotating shifts, security cameras covering every angle. Josiah had enemies, men who would love to hurt him by hurting his daughter. So he kept her hidden, kept her safe, kept her trapped in luxury and silence. Some nights, Josiah stood at his office window, staring at the Los Angeles skyline, and wondered if Ji-yoon would be proud of what he'd become. A father who'd spent millions and gotten nowhere. A man whose power meant nothing when it came to the one thing that mattered. A ghost raising a daughter in silence because he didn't know how to do anything else. Tomorrow was Saturday, grocery shopping day. One of the few normal things Josiah tried to give Nia. A trip outside the fortress. A chance to see other people, even if she couldn't hear them. His men hated it. Too exposed, they said. Too risky. But Josiah needed Nia to see that a world existed beyond their walls, even if she'd never truly be part of it. He set the photograph back on the nightstand and kissed Nia's forehead. She didn't stir. He whispered in Korean, knowing she couldn't hear, saying it anyway. Appa Sarangi, Nia. Daddy loves you. Then he walked back to his office to plan a Saturday morning that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. Somewhere across the city, another parent was lying awake, thinking about a Saturday morning grocery trip, thinking about her own child, her own losses, her own impossible burden. Tomorrow, 2 worlds would collide in a grocery store aisle, and nothing would ever be the same. Karina's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. She didn't need it. She'd been awake since 4, staring at the ceiling, running through her mental checklist. Bills due this week. Malik's science, project supplies, groceries, the catering gig Sunday afternoon that would help cover the electric bill. Her mind never stopped, never rested, never let her forget that she was doing this alone. She turned off the alarm before it could wake Malik and patted down the hallway of their small Atlanta apartment. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, Kit Tang barely big enough for a table and 4 chairs. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. She'd worked 3 jobs for the deposit, scrubbed every surface herself, hung curtains her mother-in-law had sewn. This was home now, the only home Malik had known since Marcus died. The folded flag sat on the mantel, crisp triangles, stars perfectly aligned, handed to her by a solemn officer at Arlington 3 years ago. On behalf of a grateful nation, the words had blurred. She'd stood there, numb, holding that flag while Malik sobbed against her side. 9 years old, too young to lose his father, too old not to understand that Daddy wasn't coming home. Staff Sergeant Marcus Gregory, Army medic, Kia, Afghanistan, roadside bomb on a supply route outside Kandahar. He'd been helping injured soldiers when the second explosion hit. They gave him a silver star posthumously. Karina kept it in a box in her closet. She couldn't look at it, couldn't reconcile the metal with the absence. She made coffee, started breakfast. Oatmeal with cinnamon, the way Marcus used to make it. Malik appeared at 6:15, right on schedule, still in his pajamas, eyes puffy from sleep. "Morning, baby," Karina said, pulling him into a hug. He was almost as tall as her now, 12 years old and growing too fast. She could see Marcus in him, the serious eyes, the careful way he moved through the world, the protectiveness that sat too heavy on shoulders, still learning to be strong. "Morning, Mom." He sat at the table, accepted the bowl she placed in front of him. "You were up early again." "Couldn't sleep." She poured coffee, leaned against the counter. "Big day. Groceries, your science project, that catering job tomorrow I need to prep for." Malik nodded, stirring his oatmeal. "I can help with the catering. Chop vegetables, or whatever." "You have homework." "I finished yesterday." Karina smiled. Of course he did. Malik never forgot, never slacked, never gave her a reason to worry about school. He was too good, too responsible, too aware that she was barely holding it together. "Okay," she said. "After groceries, we'll prep together." They ate in comfortable silence. Then homework check, even though she knew it would all be done. English essay, math problems, science notes. All complete, all neat, all perfect. Malik never wanted to add to her burden. Sometimes Karina wondered if that was healthy, if she was raising a child or a miniature adult who'd forgotten how to just be 12. By 8 a.m., they were dressed and ready. Karina pulled on her comfortable jeans, a simple top, her gray cardigan. Saturday clothes, normal clothes, not the business casual she wore to the hospital receptionist job, not the black pants and white shirt she wore catering. Just Karina, just Mom. She checked her purse, wallet, phone, grocery list, the small first aid kit she'd carried since her medic training. Old habits. Marcus had laughed about it. "Babe, we're going to Target, not a combat zone." But she'd kept it anyway. Band-aids for Malik's scraped knees. Tweezers for splinters. Gauze, antiseptic, the basics. You never knew when someone might need help. The drive to the grocery store took 15 minutes. Malik scrolled through his phone, texting friends about some video game Karina didn't understand. She let him. Saturday was his day too. His break from being the responsible one. She thought about Marcus. 3 years gone, and she still reached for him sometimes. Still turned to say something and found empty space. Still woke up reaching for his side of the bed. Grief didn't end. It just changed shape. Became something you carried instead of something that carried you. Marcus had been her anchor. They'd met when she was training as a medic, young and determined to serve. He'd been older, steadier, already on his second deployment. He'd taught her to breathe through the chaos, to trust her instincts, to see past the blood and fear and find the person who needed help. "You got good eyes, Carrie," he'd say. "You see what others miss." She'd left the military when Malik was born. Marcus kept serving. He'd wanted to finish his 20, retire with full benefits, give them stability. He had 3 years left when the bomb hit. Now Karina worked 2 jobs and still couldn't quite make ends meet. Hospital receptionist Monday through Friday, minimum wage and decent insurance. Catering on weekends, cash under the table that paid for extras. Malik's school supplies, new shoes when he outgrew the old ones. The small things that added up to everything. She was tired, bone deep tired, the kind that didn't go away with sleep. But she kept moving, kept working, kept showing Malik that you survived even when survival felt impossible. They pulled into the grocery store parking lot. Saturday morning, moderately busy. Karina grabbed a cart. Malik walked beside her and they headed inside. Normal. Routine. The one thing that felt manageable in a week of chaos. "What's for dinner tonight?" Malik asked. "Spaghetti. Your favorite." He grinned. Can I pick the garlic bread? Always. They moved through the produce section. Vegetables first. Karina was checking tomatoes when Malik's hand touched her arm. Mom, he said quietly. Don't look now, but that's Josiah Huang. Karina's blood went cold. She knew the name. Everyone in their neighborhood knew the name. Korean Mafia boss. Dangerous man. The kind you avoided, didn't speak to, definitely didn't make eye contact with. She looked anyway. Couldn't help it. He was in the cereal aisle, expensive suit, perfect hair, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean, voice sharp with business. And next to him, a small girl, 9, maybe 10, long black hair, light blue dress, dark eyes that looked too old for her face. The girl was touching her ear, small hand pressed against the side of her head. And even from here, even across the aisle, Karina saw it. The wince, the pain, the silent suffering. Something familiar stirred in her memory. Something from years ago. A deployment, a child, a simple problem everyone had missed. Mom, Malik whispered. Let's go. Different aisle. But Karina couldn't move. Couldn't look away from that little girl touching her ear. From the pain written across her small face. From the silence that seemed to surround her even in this loud, busy store. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. You got good eyes, Carrie. You see what others miss. And God help her, she was seeing something now. The grocery store hummed with Saturday morning energy. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of artificial brightness that made fresh produce look plastic and tired people look worse. Music played through hidden speakers, some instrumental version of a song Karina vaguely recognized but couldn't name. Shopping carts rattled down aisles. Price scanners beeped. A child somewhere was crying for candy his mother wouldn't buy. Normal. Beautifully, mundanely normal. Karina pushed her cart toward the cereal aisle, Malik beside her scrolling through his phone. They'd gotten through produce, dairy, bread. Now came the part where Malik got to pick his favorites. She watched him compare prices on 2 boxes of the same brand. Different sizes, calculating which was the better deal. 12 years old and already thinking like she did. Always counting. Always measuring. The big box, she said. Better value, and you eat it fast enough anyway. Malik grinned, tossed it in the cart. Then his smile faded. His hand touched her arm. Gentle but insistent. Mom, he said quietly, not looking up from his phone. Don't look now, but that's Josiah Huang. The name hit her chest like cold water. She'd heard it whispered in their neighborhood, seen it in news reports that never quite said what everyone knew. Korean Mafia. Dangerous. The kind of man you cross the street to avoid. But Karina looked anyway. She couldn't help it. He was 3 aisles over, visible through the gap in the shelving. Tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Hair perfect. Face sharp, controlled. Phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean, his voice carrying that edge of command that made people step aside. And they did. Other shoppers gave him space without seeming to notice they were doing it. 2 men in suits flanked him at a distance. Bodyguards trying to look casual, failing spectacularly. Too alert, too watchful, too aware of exits and angles, and everyone in the store. But Karina barely noticed the men. Her focus locked on the child. A girl, 9, maybe 10 years old. Long black hair falling past her shoulders. Light blue dress, simple and expensive. Small frame, delicate features. She stood beside the dangerous man, holding a shopping basket that looked too big for her hands. Not looking at anything. Not reaching for products. Just standing, waiting, silent, and touching her ear. The gesture was subtle. Small hand pressed against the right side of her head, just briefly. Then away. Then back again. Like she couldn't help it. Like something was wrong and she was trying to fix it or stop it or understand it. Karina's breath caught. She knew that gesture. Had seen it before. The way the girl winced, just slightly. The way her face tightened with discomfort she couldn't voice. Mom. Malik's voice was urgent now. We should go. Different aisle. He's bad news. I know who he is, Karina murmured, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Her medic brain was already working, already cataloging symptoms, already seeing past the expensive dress and the dangerous father to the child who was suffering. The girl turned slightly, adjusting her basket, and for a moment their eyes met across the aisle. Dark eyes, old eyes that had learned to stay quiet and not ask for help, eyes that expected nothing from strangers. But there was pain there too, clear and sharp and getting worse. Karina's chest tightened. That look, she'd seen it on too many faces, in too many field hospitals, on children who'd learned that crying didn't bring help, only more pain. The man's phone rang again. He answered immediately, switching to English now, his voice sharp. I don't care what time it is in Seoul. Handle it. A pause. Then wake him up. This can't wait. His attention shifted completely to the call. He turned away from his daughter, pacing toward the end cap display, voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. The bodyguard stayed alert, but relaxed slightly. Just a grocery store. Just shopping. Nothing to worry about here. Nia stood alone, still touching her ear. Then her hand dropped and she clutched the basket tighter, her small face crumpling for just a second before she controlled it, smoothed it, went back to that careful blankness. But Karina had seen the pain break through, had seen the way the girl's fingers trembled. Mom, Malik said again, more urgently. Please, let's just go. But Karina was already moving, not toward them, not directly, just closer, pretending to shop, reaching for a box of pasta she didn't need, studying the label like it mattered, positioning herself where she could see better. The girl tilted her head, adjusting the basket on her other arm. And there, in the store's harsh lighting, Karina saw it. Inside the girl's ear canal, something dark, dense, visible even from here because of how the light hit it, how the angle lined up perfectly. A mass, blocking, pressing. Recognition slammed through Karina like a physical blow. Her hands went cold. Her breath stopped. Oh my God, she whispered. I've seen this before. Afghanistan. 6 years ago, a local child brought to their base. Deaf. The parents desperate, begging for help. And Sergeant Tang, the senior medic, examining the boy with patient hands and finding what no one else had bothered to look for. Mom. Malik's voice was scared now. What's wrong? But Karina couldn't answer. Her mind was racing through possibilities, through training, through memory. That wasn't genetic deafness. That wasn't irreversible. That was blockage. Simple, treatable blockage that had probably been there for years. Growing, pressing, stealing sound from a child who'd never heard her father's voice. And no one had noticed. Or if they hadn't cared enough to look closer. The man finished his call, turned back toward his daughter. His face softened slightly when he looked at her, some of that dangerous edge falling away. He touched her head gently, said something Karina couldn't hear. The girl didn't respond, couldn't respond, just nodded, understanding somehow without sound. They started moving toward checkout, bodyguards falling into formation around them. Karina stood frozen, pasta box still in her hand, mind screaming at her to do something, say something, tell him what she'd seen. But he was Josiah Huang, criminal, dangerous, a man who broke doctors' noses and threatened specialists, a man whose bodyguards carried guns under their expensive suits, a man who would see a black woman approaching his daughter and think threat, not help. And she had Malik to think about. Malik, who'd already lost his father, who couldn't lose his mother too. Let's go, Malik said, tugging her sleeve. Mom, please. Karina looked at her son, saw fear in his eyes. Fear for her. Fear of the dangerous man and what might happen if she did what every instinct was screaming at her to do. She looked back at the girl, saw her clutching her ear again, face tight with pain she'd learned to hide. And Karina made a choice. The wrong choice. The safe choice. She put the pasta back on the shelf and turned toward a different aisle. But she couldn't leave. Her feet wouldn't move down the aisle, wouldn't carry her away from that child. Karina stood there, hand on the cart, Malik beside her waiting, and her mind dragged her backward through time to a place she tried not to remember too often. Afghanistan. 6 years ago. Forward Operating Base Shank, Logar Province. She'd been 25, 3 months into her deployment, still learning to sleep through mortar fire, still learning that the human body could bleed in ways the textbooks never quite captured. The family had come at sunrise. A farmer, his wife, their son, maybe 8 years old, skinny, eyes too big for his face. They'd walked through a combat zone to reach the base, carrying the boy between them because he couldn't understand their shouts to run when the shooting started. Deaf, born that way, the father said through the interpreter. The village had no doctors, no medicine, no help, just prayers that didn't work and a boy growing up in silence while war roared around him. Karina had been cleaning medical supplies when they brought him to the aid station. Sergeant Tang had examined him, patient and thorough, while the parents watched with that particular brand of desperate hope Karina had learned to recognize. The hope that said they'd already been disappointed 1,000 times but couldn't stop trying. Tang had tilted the boy's head toward the light, looked into his ear with a scope, gone very still. "Carrie," he'd said, "come here. You need to see this." She'd looked, seen the massive blockage, years of cerumen buildup, so dense it looked like wet stone, completely occluding the ear canal. The other ear was nearly as bad. How did no one notice this, she'd asked. Because no one looked, Tang said. They heard deaf and assumed it was permanent, genetic, unfixable. No one bothered to check for the simple explanation. He'd extracted it right there, carefully, gently, using irrigation and tools that seemed too big for such small ears. The boy had held perfectly still, trusting or terrified or both. And when the blockage came free, when Tang cleaned the canal and stepped back, the boy's eyes had gone wide. He'd heard the tent flap moving in the wind, heard voices, heard his mother crying. He'd touched his ears like they were brand new, like he'd never known ears could do this. And then he'd started laughing and crying and signing frantically to his parents, who'd fallen to their knees thanking Allah and the American doctor and anyone else who might be listening. Sometimes the answer is simple, Tang had told Karina later, cleaning his instruments. We just have to look, really look, past the obvious diagnosis, past what we assume. We have to see the person, not the condition. Karina had never forgotten that. Never forgotten the way that boy's face had transformed. Never forgotten that deafness wasn't always what it seemed. And now, standing in a grocery store in Atlanta, she was looking at the same thing, the same blockage, the same simple problem everyone had missed because they'd stopped looking. Her hands trembled. She gripped the cart harder, trying to steady herself, trying to think past the recognition and the memory and the impossible situation. This wasn't Afghanistan, wasn't a forward operating base where her authority was clear and protocols were established. This was a public store. That was someone else's child, someone dangerous child. And Karina had no right, no permission, no reason to be involved except that she'd seen what no one else had seen. Mom, Malik said, his voice tight with worry. Let's go. This isn't our business. He was right. It wasn't their business. That girl had a father, had money, had access to the best specialists in the world. Probably. She didn't need some random stranger in a grocery store making observations about her medical condition. Except those specialists had missed it or ignored it, and that child was suffering. Karina looked across the aisle again, The man was still on his phone, but the girl had moved slightly, leaning against the cart now. Both hands pressed to her ear. Her face was tilted down, but Karina could see the tears. Silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Pain she couldn't voice. Pain no one was noticing because her father was distracted and the bodyguards were watching for threats. Not watching her. Marcus's voice came to her then, clear as if he were standing beside her. His last morning before deployment, standing in their kit tang, uniform pressed, duffel by the door, holding her face in his hands. Promise me something, Carrie. Anything. Don't let fear stop you from doing good. I know the world's dangerous. I know bad things happen, but you've got a gift. You see people. You see their pain. Don't let fear make you blind. She'd promised, had kissed him goodbye, had watched him deploy and come home in a flag-draped coffin 3 months later. Don't let fear stop you from doing good. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a man who could have her killed. This was a situation where help could be mistaken for threat. This was Malik standing beside her, waiting, trusting that she'd make the smart choice. The safe choice. Karina closed her eyes, whispered under her breath, Marcus, if you can hear me, I need courage now. I need to know what to do. When she opened her eyes, the girl was looking at her again. Direct eye contact across the aisle. And in that moment, Karina saw everything. The pain, the loneliness, the resignation, the expectation that no one would help because no one ever had. She saw Malik at 9 years old, clutching that folded flag, sobbing that he wanted his daddy back. She saw the Afghan boy laughing and crying when he heard his mother's voice for the first time. She saw Marcus's face. Don't let fear stop you. Her decision crystallized. Malik, she said quietly, stay close to me. Don't leave my side, no matter what happens. Mom, what are you? But Karina was already moving, not toward checkout, not toward safety, toward the girl who needed help and the dangerous man who terrified her and the choice that might cost her everything. It happened fast. 1 second, Nia was leaning against the cart, tears sliding down her cheeks. The next, she doubled over, both hands clutching her ear, her mouth opening in what should have been a scream, but came out as nothing. Silent agony, silent desperation, her small body folding in on itself, like she could make the pain smaller by making herself smaller. Karina's heart stopped. Josiah was still on the phone, pacing toward the end cap, his back partially to his daughter. I don't pay you to tell me what you can't do, he was saying in English, his voice sharp enough to cut. I pay you to solve problems. So solve it, or I'll find someone who can. The bodyguards had relaxed even more. One was checking his phone, scrolling through messages. The other was watching the store entrance, tracking everyone who came and went. Neither was watching the girl collapsing against the shopping cart. No one was watching her. Karina's mind went into overdrive. Risk assessment, the thing they drilled into her during training. Evaluate the situation. Weigh the costs. Make the smart call. Cost 1. Approaching that child meant approaching Josiah Huang, a man with connections, a man who solved problems with violence, a man who might see a stranger touching his daughter and react before thinking. She could be arrested, charged with assault. Worse. Cost 2, she had Malik. Malik, who'd already lost his father. Malik, who needed her alive and free and present. What kind of mother risked her son's only remaining parent for a stranger's child? Cost 3, this was none of her business. That girl had a father, had resources, had access to medical care Karina could only dream of affording. Who was she to interfere? But then there was the other side, the only reason that mattered. A child was suffering, right now, right in front of her, and Karina knew what was wrong, knew how to fix it, knew that every second that blockage stayed lodged in the ear canal, that child was living in unnecessary silence and pain. She looked at Nia's face, twisted with agony, and saw someone else. Saw Ji-yoon, the mother she'd never met, dying in childbirth and leaving behind a daughter who'd never hear her name. Saw a mother's last gift to the world suffering because no one had bothered to look closely enough. She looked again and saw Malik. Saw her son at 9 years old, curled on his bed after Marcus died, pressing his hands over his ears like he could block out the silence of his father's absence. Saw every child who needed someone to notice, someone to care, someone to act even when it was hard and scary and dangerous. Karina's hands were shaking. Her breath was coming too fast, but her decision was crystallizing, becoming solid, becoming inevitable. She turned to Malik. He was watching her with wide eyes, already knowing what she was about to do, already terrified. "Malik," she said, quietly gripping his shoulders. "Stay right here. Don't move. No matter what happens, you stay in this spot. You understand?" "Mom, no." His voice cracked. "Please, that's Josiah Huang. He's dangerous. If you..." "I know who he is." "Then you know this is crazy. You know." "Baby, look at her." Karina's voice broke. "Look at that little girl. She's in pain and no one's helping her. No one even sees her. That's not your fault. That's not your problem." "Maybe not, but I see her, and I know what's wrong. And if I walk away..." Karina's eyes filled with tears. "If I walk away and do nothing, I don't know how I live with that." "Mom." "Your father would understand," Karina whispered. "He'd understand why I have to do this." Malik's face crumpled. "Dad's not here. I am. And I need you." "I know, baby. I know. And I'm going to be right here. I promise. But I have to help her. You'll understand when you're older. I promise you will." She kissed his forehead, squeezed his shoulders one more time, then let go. Her purse was already open. She reached inside with trembling hands, finding the small first aid kit she'd carried since Marcus died, since she'd learned that the world could take everything in an instant and you had to be ready, always ready, to help or save or at least try. The tweezers were there, small, precise, sterilized. She'd used them on Malik just last week, removing a splinter from his palm. Simple, routine, nothing like what she was about to do. She pulled out the hand sanitizer. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. She squeezed a generous amount onto the tweezers, coating them, sterilizing them as best she could in a grocery store aisle. Professional medical standards went out the window when you were working field conditions. This was field conditions. This was making do with what you had and praying it was enough. Across the aisle, Nia was still doubled over, still clutching her ear, still crying those silent tears that no one else was seeing. Karina closed her eyes, took a breath, found the place inside her that had survived Afghanistan and mortar fire and holding soldiers' hands while they died. Found the medic she used to be, the one who didn't freeze, the one who acted. "God," she whispered, so quietly Malik couldn't hear. "Guide my hands. Protect my son. Let this work. Please, please let this work." She opened her eyes, looked at Malik one more time, saw his fear, saw his love, saw his desperate hope that she knew what she was doing. Then she stepped forward, tweezers in hand, heart hammering, mind clear, toward the suffering child, toward the dangerous father, toward the moment that would either save a life or destroy her own. Right here. This is the moment everything changes. If you've made it this far, you need to see what happens next. Hit subscribe and that notification bell because what Karina is about to do in the next 60 seconds, it's going to leave you breathless. Stay with me. Karina's legs felt like water, but she kept moving. 3 steps. 5. Crossing the invisible boundary between safe observation and dangerous action. The store's music played overhead. Some cheerful instrumental that felt obscene against what she was about to do. Nia was still bent over the cart, both hands pressed to her ear now, small body trembling. Close up, Karina could see how young she really was. 9 maybe, Small for her age, delicate, breakable, Karina knelt down, brought herself to the girl's level. Their eyes met. The child's face was wet with tears. Her eyes were squeezed shut against pain. But when Karina's shadow fell across her, they opened. Dark brown, shocked, confused, used to being invisible even when she was suffering. Someone was seeing her. Karina's hands moved before she could second guess. She'd learned basic ASL when Marcus was deployed, thinking maybe she'd work with veterans when she got out. Now she signed, slow and clear, hoping the girl would understand. I can help. Trust me. Nia's eyes went wider. Her hands dropped slightly from her ear. Someone was signing to her. A stranger in a grocery store was signing to her. Someone who saw not just her pain, but her silence. Someone who understood. Karina signed again. Something in your ear. I can remove it. Okay. For a long moment, Nia just stared. Karina could see the calculation happening behind those dark eyes. The years of doctors who'd hurt her. The years of procedures that hadn't helped. The years of learning that help meant pain and disappointment. But she was also 9 years old and hurting desperately. And this stranger had kind eyes. Nia gave the smallest nod. Karina's breath released. Thank you, she mouthed. Then she gently tilted Nia's head toward the fluorescent lights overhead, angling for the best view into her ear canal. There it was, clear as day now. The blockage, massive. Years of buildup compressed into a dense plug that was pressing against everything, blocking everything. Stealing sound from a child who'd never known her world had volume. Karina's medic training kicked in. Steady hands, clear mind, focus on the task. She positioned the tweezers carefully, precisely. This wasn't like Afghanistan where she'd had proper tools and supervision. This was improvisation. This was trusting muscle memory and praying she didn't make things worse. Hey! One of the bodyguards had noticed. Was moving forward, hand going inside his jacket where guns lived. Karina's hand stayed steady. She was committed now. No turning back. Hey, get away from. Then Josiah's voice, sharp as a knife. Get away from my daughter. Karina didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The tweezers were already inserted, already hooking the edge of the blockage. If she pulled away now, she could damage the canal. Could hurt this child worse than she already was. Footsteps thundering toward her. Josiah's phone hitting the floor, clattering across linoleum. His voice rising, switching to Korean, probably ordering his men to grab her, remove her, hurt her. But Karina had learned to work under pressure, had learned to block out chaos and focus on the single thing that mattered. Right now, that was the mass of cerumen lodged in this child's ear. She hooked it, felt resistance, dense, packed tight, adhered to the canal wall from years of sitting undisturbed. She applied gentle, steady pressure, pulling, coaxing, praying. I said, get away. The resistance broke. The mass slid free. Karina pulled the tweezers out carefully, and in her palm sat the thing that had stolen 9 years of sound from a child who'd never deserved silence. Dark, wet, biological. Years of stolen hearing compressed into something the size of a large pea. The grocery store seemed to hold its breath. The muzak still played, but everything else went quiet. The bodyguards frozen mid-step. Josiah frozen with his hand outstretched, half reaching for Karina, half reaching for his daughter. Other shoppers stopping, staring, not understanding what they were witnessing, but sensing something significant. For one eternal second, nothing happened. Then Nia gasped. It was loud, audible, real. The kind of gasp that came from someone experiencing something impossible. Her eyes flew wide, wider than wide, shock and wonder and terror all mixed together. Her head whipped to the side, toward a sound. A shopping cart rattling past. She'd heard it, actually heard it. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was hearing her own breathing, hearing the blood rushing in her ears, hearing the hum of refrigerator units and the beep of checkout scanners and the instrumental music she'd never known played in grocery stores. Her hands flew to her ears, touching them like they were new, like they'd been replaced with someone else's ears that worked. She turned toward her father, stared at him. He was standing there, phone on the floor, face white as death, not understanding what had just happened, but seeing his daughter's expression. Seeing something he'd never seen before. Nia's mouth opened. A sound came out, rough, unpracticed, the voice of someone who'd never heard her own words. But real. So real. Appa. The Korean word for father. Tentative. Questioning. Wondering if that sound she was making was actually reaching him. If this thing she'd never been able to do was actually happening. Josiah's legs buckled. He didn't fall, but he staggered, catching himself on the cart. His face was doing things Karina had never seen a face do. Collapsing and rebuilding. Breaking and healing. Dying and being born. Appa. Nia said again, louder this time, hearing her own voice, hearing how it sounded outside her head, hearing, for the first time in her life, the word she'd only ever signed. Her father's name, the only sound that had ever really mattered. Josiah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. His daughter, his deaf daughter, who'd never heard a sound in 9 years, had just said his name, out loud, with her voice, a voice he'd never heard before because it had never existed. But rage was easier than wonder. Rage was familiar. Rage was what kept him alive in a world where weakness meant death. His bodyguards moved first, both of them, closing in on the black woman kneeling beside his daughter, hands sliding inside their jackets where weapons lived, training taking over, threat assessment, stranger touching the boss's daughter, stranger doing something that left the girl gasping and the boss frozen. Eliminate the threat. Mom. A boy's voice, sharp with terror. Malik pushed through, grabbing Karina's arm. Mom, we have to go. Now. But Karina didn't run. She stood slowly, placing herself between the approaching bodyguards and her son. Hands visible, non-threatening. The stance of someone who'd been trained to de-escalate dangerous situations. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I didn't hurt her, she said clearly. Look at your daughter. I helped her. Around them, the grocery store had erupted into chaos. Shoppers backing away, pulling out phones, recording. The store manager was on his phone, voice urgent. Yes, 911. There's a situation. A child. I don't know. Just send someone. One bodyguard reached Karina, hand closing on her arm. Hard. The grip of someone prepared to drag her away, hurt her if necessary. But then Nia's voice cut through everything. Wait. Not a whisper. Not a sign. A spoken word. Loud enough that everyone heard. Loud enough that the bodyguard froze. Loud enough that Josiah's head snapped toward his daughter like he'd been physically struck. Nia was touching her throat. Her small hand pressed against her neck, feeling the vibration of her own voice. Her eyes were huge, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, actually smiling. A expression Josiah had rarely seen because what did his daughter have to smile about? What joy existed in silence? But she was smiling now, crying and smiling and touching her throat like it was magic. I hear you, she said, her voice rough and unpracticed but real. So impossibly real. I hear everything. She turned toward the muzak playing overhead, toward the beep of a price scanner, toward the rattle of shopping carts and the murmur of shoppers and the hum of refrigerators. Sounds that had always existed but never reached her. Sounds that were flooding into her consciousness, now like water breaking through a dam. Her head swiveled, trying to identify sources. That sound came from there. That one from over there. The world was suddenly full of noise and meaning and connection, and she was drowning in it, overwhelmed by it, terrified and amazed by it. She looked at Karina. Thank you, she said in English. Her first English words spoken aloud, not signed, spoken. Thank you. Thank you. And Josiah's carefully constructed world cracked down the middle. 9 years. 9 years of failure. 9 years of throwing money and threats and connections at a problem that wouldn't yield. 9 years of watching his daughter live in silence while he drowned in guilt and rage and helplessness. 9 years of specialists shaking their heads and saying irreversible, accepting it, learning to live with it. And this stranger, this random black woman in a grocery store, had fixed it in seconds. His face was doing things he couldn't control. Collapsing. He felt it collapsing. The mask he wore, the armor he maintained, the deadly calm that made men fear him, all of it cracking apart. His voice came out broken, barely a whisper. What did you do? Karina stood there, mallet pressed against her back, facing down a man who could end her with a phone call. But her eyes were soft, compassionate, the eyes of someone who'd seen suffering and couldn't walk away from it. She held out her palm, showed him the dark, wet mass sitting there. Years of buildup, years of stolen sound. What every doctor should have done 9 years ago, she said quietly. It's cerumen impaction. A blockage. Simple. Treatable. It was sitting right there in her ear canal. Anyone who looked would have seen it. The words hit Josiah like physical blows. Simple. Treatable. Anyone who looked. Seoul. Tokyo. Zurich. New York. Specialists who charge thousands per hour. Tests that cost tens of thousands. Procedures that promised nothing and delivered less. And none of them, not one of them, had seen this, had looked closely enough to notice a blockage that a stranger spotted across a grocery store aisle. Or worse, they had seen it and said nothing because his desperation was profitable, because his daughter's silence kept the money flowing. The rage came then, pure and white hot, not at this woman, at himself, at the doctors, at the whole corrupt system that had stolen 9 years from his daughter while taking millions from him. But before the rage could explode, before he could start making the calls that would destroy careers and ruin lives, Nia moved. She grabbed his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his, and she pulled, actually pulled him toward Karina, toward the stranger who'd done the impossible. Appa, she said, her voice still rough but getting stronger, more certain. She helped me. She didn't hurt me. Please. That word. Please. Spoken aloud, not signed, her voice forming the syllables, her ears hearing them come out, her brain processing the sound of her own pleading. Josiah had never heard his daughter say please, had never heard her say anything, and now she was using her first real words to beg him not to hurt the woman who'd given her sound. He looked at his bodyguards. They were waiting for orders, hands still inside jackets, eyes on Karina. One signal and they'd remove her, permanently if he wanted. That's what they were paid for. That's what they did. But Nia was holding his hand, was pulling him toward the stranger, was looking up at him with eyes that heard now, eyes that had sound behind them. Please, Appa, she said again. And God help him, he couldn't deny her. Not now. Not after this. He raised his hand. His men stepped back, confused but obedient. The threat level dropped, but didn't disappear. Everyone in the store was still watching, recording, waiting to see if this ended in gratitude or violence. Josiah looked at Karina, really looked at her, saw the fear she was hiding, saw the boy pressed against her back, terrified for his mother, saw her hands trembling even though her voice had stayed steady, saw someone who'd risked everything for a stranger's child. Who are you? He asked. Karina Gregory. Her voice was quiet, but didn't waver. I'm a widow. My husband was Army. I was trained as a medic. I saw what was wrong and I couldn't. She stopped, swallowed. I couldn't walk away. Josiah's jaw tightened. A medic, not even a doctor. A medic who'd seen what million-dollar specialists had missed or ignored. a widow with a scared son who'd risked everything because she couldn't walk away from a suffering child. He looked at the mass in her palm, looked at his daughter, who was still discovering sound, still overwhelmed by the noise of the grocery store, looked at the bodyguards and the recording phones and the manager still on with 911. This situation was impossible, uncontrolled, dangerous. Every instinct told him to shut it down, take his daughter and leave. Make this woman sign NDAs backed by threats that would ensure she never spoke of this. Return to his fortress and his silence and his carefully controlled world. But Nia was hearing. For the first time in 9 years, his daughter was hearing. And this woman, this stranger, had given that to her. Josiah made a decision that went against every survival instinct he'd honed over decades in the criminal world. Hospital, he said. Now, my car. You're coming with us. It wasn't a request, but it also wasn't a threat. It was something else. Something Josiah didn't have words for because he'd never felt it before. It was gratitude mixed with confusion, mixed with rage at himself, mixed with desperate need to understand what had just happened. To have doctors confirm what his eyes were telling him, that his daughter could hear. That 9 years of silence had ended in a grocery store aisle because a stranger decided to care. Karina looked at her son. Malik was shaking his head, mouthing, "No, no, no." Getting in a car with Josiah Huang was suicide. Everyone knew that. But Nia reached out, took Karina's hand. "Please," she said again. That word she'd just learned to speak. "Come with us." And Karina, because she was who she was, because she'd already crossed every line and broken every rule of self-preservation, nodded. "Okay," she said. "We'll come." Malik made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "Mom, this is insane." "I know, baby," Karina whispered. "But we're in it now." The car was a Mercedes. Black, bulletproof, probably worth more than every vehicle Karina had ever owned combined. She sat in the back with Malik pressed against her side, Nia on her other side still clutching her hand like a lifeline. Josiah was in the front passenger seat, phone to his ear, speaking rapid Korean, giving orders, making arrangements. The driver, another bodyguard, drove with the kind of aggressive efficiency that suggested he'd done high-speed escapes before. This was surreal, terrifying, necessary. Karina's heart hadn't stopped racing since they'd left the grocery store. She'd walked out between two bodyguards, her son gripping her hand, following a Mafia boss to his car. The store manager had tried to stop them. "Ma'am, the police are coming. You should wait." But Josiah had looked at him with those deadly eyes, and the manager had stepped back. Just stepped back and let them leave. Because that's what people did when Josiah Huang told them to. Now they were speeding toward Cedar Sinai, the hospital Josiah had called ahead to. Clearing space, demanding their best ENT specialist, making it clear that money was no object and delays would not be tolerated. Nia was still discovering sound. She kept making small noises, hums, clicks, whispers, just to hear them, just to feel them vibrate in her throat and reach her ears. She'd laugh, then cry, then laugh again, overwhelmed, overjoyed, processing 9 years of silence, being replaced by noise in the span of minutes. "What's that sound?" she kept asking in Korean, then trying again in English, pointing at the engine. At the radio Josiah had turned on low, at the wind rushing past the windows. Everything was new. Everything was wonder. Malik leaned close to Karina's ear. "Mom," he whispered, "what have you done?" "I don't know," she whispered back, "but there's no going back now. If he hurts you, he won't." She squeezed Malik's hand. "Look at his daughter. He won't hurt the person who gave her hearing. You don't know that. He's dangerous, Mom. He's..." "I know, baby. I know. But we're okay. We're going to be okay." She wished she believed it. The hospital was ready when they arrived. Doctors waiting. A private examination room already prepared. Josiah carried Nia inside. She still wouldn't let go of Karina's hand. So Karina walked with them, Malik refusing to leave her side. The bodyguards formed a perimeter. This was the most visible Josiah Huang had been in years. In a public hospital, with witnesses, with a stranger who'd seen him vulnerable. It was unprecedented and terrifying, and somehow moving forward anyway. Dr. Park met them in the examination room. Korean American, late 50s, the kind of exhausted competence that came from decades of emergency medicine. He took one look at the situation. Dangerous man, crying child, nervous black woman with her son, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Mr. Huang," he said in English, "what's the emergency?" "My daughter can hear," Josiah said flatly. "She was deaf. Now she can hear. I need to know how. I need to know why. I need to know everything." Dr. Park's eyebrows rose. "I'll need to examine her." "Do it." The examination took 20 minutes. Dr. Park was thorough, gentle, professional. He looked in Nia's ears with an otoscope, tested her hearing with tuning forks, whispers, snaps, checked the other ear, also impacted, though less severely, examined the cerumen plug Karina had handed him, sealed now in a specimen bag. His face went pale. "Mr. Huang," he said carefully, "can we speak privately?" "No. Whatever you have to say it here." Dr. Park glanced at Karina, at Malik, at the bodyguards. "This is a family matter." "Say it." The doctor took a breath, pulled up his tablet, started typing, accessing files. "Mr. Huang, I need to see Nia's previous medical records. With your permission." Josiah's jaw clenched. "You have it." More typing. Then Dr. Park's face went from pale to gray. He stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. His hands started shaking. "What?" Josiah's voice was deadly quiet. "What is it?" Dr. Park turned the tablet around, showed him a medical note from 5 years ago. Cedars-Sinai, a routine checkup. The notation was circled in red by the doctor's own hand. Significant cerumen impaction observed in right ear canal. Recommend extraction procedure. Priority moderate. Patient presents with conductive hearing loss secondary to obstruction. Below it, a follow-up note from 2 weeks later. Spoke with patient's father regarding extraction procedure. Father prefers to continue with ongoing experimental treatments through specialists in Seoul. Will continue current protocol and monitor. No extraction performed. Josiah stared at the screen. Karina watched his face do terrible things. Watched understanding dawn. Watched rage and grief and disbelief collide. "I never saw this," he whispered. "They never told me." "Mr. Huang," Dr. Park started. "They never told me." Josiah's voice rose cracked. 5 years ago. 5 years. They knew. They saw it. And they said nothing. Dr. Park's face was grim. "Mr. Huang, with respect, you were a revenue stream. Your desperation was profitable. The more irreversible your daughter's condition appeared, the more you'd pay for experimental treatments, consultations, procedures, second opinions, third opinions. The specialists weren't trying to cure her. They were managing a lucrative client." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Karina's stomach turned. She'd suspected, had known, deep down, that the medical system could be corrupt. But this was evil, deliberate evil, keeping a child deaf, keeping her suffering, all for money. Josiah was shaking, not with fear, with rage, pure, bottomless rage. "Names," he said quietly. "I want every name. Every doctor who saw that note, every specialist who examined her, everyone who knew and said nothing. Mr. Huang, I can't." "Names." The word exploded out of him. "You will give me names or I will burn this hospital to the ground." Dr. Park stepped back, nodded. "I'll compile a list." "Do it now." The doctor left, fast, leaving them alone in the examination room. Nia was still touching her ears, still overwhelmed, still discovering that the world had volume. She didn't understand what the adults were discussing, didn't know that people had stolen years from her for profit. Josiah stood at the window, back to everyone. His shoulders were shaking. His hands were fists. Karina had seen men break before, in combat, in emergency rooms, in moments where reality became too much to bear. She was watching a man break now. Malik tugged her sleeve. "Mom, can we go? Please." "Not yet," she whispered. "Why not? We did what you wanted." She can hear. "We should leave before." "Because he needs to know he's not alone," Karina said quietly. "He needs to know someone sees him too." Malik looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd lost it in that grocery store aisle when she decided to risk everything for a stranger. But she stood, walked to where Josiah was standing. Not too close, giving him space, but close enough that he'd know she was there. "Mr. Huang," she said quietly. He didn't turn. "You should go. Take your son. Leave. I'll have my lawyer send papers. NDAs. Compensation for your time. You'll be taken care of. Just go." "I don't want your money. Everyone wants money." "Not for this." Karina's voice was soft. "I didn't do this for payment. I did it because your daughter was suffering and I could help." Josiah finally turned. His face was wet. Tears he hadn't bothered to hide or wipe away. A man who'd built an empire on being feared, crying in front of a stranger. "They stole 9 years from her," he whispered. 9 years of her life, of her hearing, of sound and music, and my voice telling her I love her. They stole it for money. "I know. I'll destroy them. Every single one." "I know that too." They stared at each other. Crime lord and widow. Power and compassion. Two people destroyed by loss and rebuilt by desperate love for their children. "My wife died giving birth to Nia," Josiah said. "I thought God was punishing me for the things I'd done, the blood on my hands. I thought he took my wife and cursed my daughter because of who I am." Karina's eyes filled with tears. "My husband died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. I thought God had abandoned us, left me alone to raise our son. I stopped believing he heard my prayers." They stood there, two broken people, two surviving parents, sharing losses too heavy to carry alone. "I didn't abandon you," Karina said softly. "In that grocery store, I could have walked away, but I didn't, because maybe we don't face these things alone. Maybe that's what faith is, showing up for each other when it's hard and scary and dangerous." Josiah's jaw trembled. "You risked everything." "Yes, for a stranger's child, for a child who needed help." He shook his head. "I broke a doctor's nose and soul, threatened specialists, made enemies in every hospital I visited. And you just knelt down and fixed her." Karina smiled through her tears. "Sometimes the answer is simple. We just have to look." Behind them, Neil laughed. Actually laughed. A sound of pure joy as she discovered that laughter had sound. Both parents turned, watched her, heard her, and something impossible happened in that examination room. Josiah Huang, feared Mafia boss, started to laugh too. Through tears, through pain, through 9 years of silence, finally ending. And Karina, standing beside him, holding her son's hand, laughed with him. 2 hours later, Karina sat in the hospital waiting room with Malik curled against her side, half asleep from adrenaline crash. The bodyguards had backed off, standing at the far end of the hallway instead of looming directly over them. Dr. Park had admitted Nia for overnight observation, standard protocol for sudden hearing restoration. He'd explained. They wanted to monitor for complications, do more thorough testing, make sure the other ear was properly cleaned. Karina should have left, should have taken Malik home, away from this impossible situation, back to their small apartment and their normal life. But Nia had asked her to stay. had signed it and spoken it both, her rough voice saying, "Please stay," while her hands formed the familiar signs. And Karina, who'd already made every wrong decision when it came to self-preservation, had stayed. She heard footsteps, looked up. Josiah Huang was walking toward her, alone. No bodyguards flanking him. No phone pressed to his ear. No armor of authority and threat. Just a man in an expensive suit that somehow looked rumpled now. Exhausted, walking like he was carrying the world on his shoulders. He sat down across from them, not beside them. That would have been too familiar, too presumptuous. But across, close enough to talk, far enough to give space. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Malik had gone tense against Karina's side, awake now, watching the dangerous man with wide eyes, ready to run or fight or do whatever 12-year-old boys did when their mothers sat across from Mafia bosses in hospital waiting rooms. Karina put her hand on Malik's knee, squeezed gently. "We're okay. I promise." Josiah looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly. Karina noticed because her hands had done the same thing after particularly bad days in Afghanistan, after soldiers died, after she'd tried everything and it hadn't been enough. The shakes that came when adrenaline drained and reality crashed in. "My wife's name was Jiyun," he said finally. His voice was quiet, raw, nothing like the sharp command she'd heard in the grocery store. "She died the day Nia was born, hemorrhaging. I held her hand while she died. She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her over the doctors, over the machines. I'll never know what her last words were." Karina's throat tightened. She nodded slowly. "My husband was Marcus, Staff Sergeant Marcus Gregory, Army medic. He died 3 years ago in Afghanistan. Roadside bomb. He was helping wounded soldiers when the second explosion hit." She paused. "I got a folded flag and a silver star and a 9-year-old son who cried himself to sleep for 6 months." Josiah looked up, met her eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition, the kind that only happened between people who'd been gutted by loss and somehow found the strength to keep breathing, to keep moving, to keep showing up for the children who needed them to be whole when they felt shattered. "I threatened people," Josiah said. "Paid millions, used every connection I had, flew around the world demanding answers, made enemies in every hospital." His voice cracked, and I never just looked at her, really looked, saw what she was trying to tell me with the way she touched her ear, with the pain in her face. I was so busy trying to fix the big problem that I missed the simple answer. "You loved her the best way you knew how," Karina said gently. "You used everything you had to try to help her. It wasn't enough. It was everything you had." Josiah shook his head. "You saw her, a stranger in a grocery store, and you saw what I missed. What $1-million specialists missed. You saw my daughter." Karina leaned forward slightly. "I saw a child suffering. Everything else, your reputation, the danger, the risk, none of that mattered in that moment. There was just a little girl in pain, and I knew how to help her." "It should have mattered," Josiah said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "I'm dangerous. You knew that. Your son knew that. You should have walked away, protected yourself, protected him." He glanced at Malik. "But you didn't." "No," Karina said simply. "I didn't." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking about Marcus, about Afghanistan, about all the times she'd had to choose between safety and doing what was right, about the promise she'd made to herself after her brother died, after Marcus deployed, after the world kept taking and taking, and she decided she wouldn't become someone who just let it happen. "You're a father," she said finally. "I'm a mother. Our children are everything. They're why we wake up, why we keep going, why we survive when survival feels impossible." That's all that mattered in that moment. Not power or money or danger, just that your daughter needed help and I could give it. Josiah's eyes filled with tears. Karina watched them spill over. Watched this man who'd probably killed people, who definitely terrified people, crying in a hospital waiting room because a stranger had shown his daughter compassion. I don't know how to thank you, he whispered. I don't know what would be enough. Money seems insulting. Anything I can offer seems. Love her, Karina said. Her own eyes were wet now. Listen to her. Really listen. When she speaks, when she signs, when she just looks at you, see her. That's all the thanks I need. That's all any child needs. Josiah opened his mouth to respond, but then Nia's voice cut through the waiting room. Appa! Karina! They both turned. Nia was standing in the doorway with Dr. Park, headphones on her head, connected to a tablet the doctor was holding. Her face was lit up with joy, so pure it hurt to look at. The kind of joy that came from discovering something you'd never known existed. She ran toward them, tripping slightly over her own feet in her excitement, and grabbed both of their hands. Listen to this, she said, her voice getting steadier, more confident. She pulled one headphone off, pressed it to Karina's ear. Music poured out. Children's music. Simple melodies. Bright, cheerful notes that probably sounded basic to anyone who'd heard music their whole life, but must have seemed like magic to a girl hearing it for the first time. What is singing? Nia asked, looking between Karina and her father with wonder. Why does it make my heart feel big? Why does it make me want to cry and dance at the same time? Karina knelt down, pulled Nia close. That's music, sweetheart. People making sounds with their voices and instruments, creating something beautiful just to share it with others. It's so. Nia struggled for words. So much. Everything is so much. I know, baby. It's overwhelming, but you'll get used to it. You'll learn to love all the different sounds. Music and laughter and rain and wind and your father's voice when he tells you he loves you. Nia's face crumpled. Happy tears. Overwhelmed tears. Can he tell me now? Out loud? So I can hear it. Karina looked up at Josiah. He was staring at his daughter like he'd never seen her before. Like she was brand new. Like 9 years of knowing her had just been erased and replaced with this. A child who could hear him. Nia pulled off the headphones completely, walked to her father, placed them over his ears so he could hear what she'd been hearing. The simple children's music that was opening up her world. Josiah listened, heard the melodies his daughter was discovering, heard the world she was stepping into, and something in his face broke and healed simultaneously. Nia signed and spoke at the same time, her hands and voice working together. I love you, Appa. Can you hear me say it? Josiah's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, pulled his daughter close, and then impossibly reached out and pulled Karina into the embrace too. 3 people who'd been strangers hours ago, holding each other in a hospital waiting room while a 12-year-old boy watched, and a doctor smiled and bodyguards pretended not to see their boss crying. I hear you, Nia, Josiah whispered against his daughter's hair, using the Korean diminutive for the first time, knowing she could actually hear it. Finally, I hear you. And I hear you, Nia said, wonder still in her voice. Your voice is deep and sad, but also warm. Josiah laughed through his tears. Yes, that's what fathers sound like. They held each other, 2 broken people and a child who'd been given the world. And Malik, watching from his seat, learned something about courage that had nothing to do with soldiers or war or physical strength. He learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was care about someone else's pain more than your own safety. To everyone who stayed until this moment, thank you. You're the reason I tell these stories. If Karina's courage reminded you of someone in your life, someone who showed up for you when it was hard and scary and dangerous, tell me about them in the comments. I want to hear it. And if you're new here, welcome to the family. Hit subscribe. We're just getting started. The weeks that followed were surreal. Josiah insisted on covering the hospital bills, refused to hear otherwise. But when he tried to give Karina money, tried to compensate her for what she'd done, she refused. I don't want payment for helping a child, she said firmly. Then what do you want? She'd hesitated. Then, quietly, I was training to be a nurse before Marcus died. Had to drop out when the bills started piling up. If you really want to help me finish what I started. Not charity, investment, in someone who you trust to care about your daughter. Josiah had looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Deal. So Karina went back to nursing school, and Nia started visiting their small apartment, bodyguards waiting awkwardly outside while a mafia boss's daughter learned to be friends with a fatherless black boy who taught her about hip-hop and basketball and normal kid things she'd never experienced. She taught Malik Korean words. He taught her to love music. All kinds of music, not just children's songs. 2 broken families, 2 lost spouses, 2 surviving parents, learning that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant making space for new connections, new hope, new possibilities. On a Sunday evening 6 weeks later, Karina stood at her Kit Tang window, watching Nia and Malik play video games on the couch. The sound turned up loud because Nia loved hearing the music and explosions and character voices. Josiah was there too, sitting stiffly in her old armchair, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes but present, trying, learning to let his daughter have friends and laughter and normalcy. Karina thought about that grocery store aisle, about the moment she decided to risk everything, about how one choice, one act of compassion, had changed 4 lives completely. She whispered it aloud, half prayer, half truth. God doesn't ask us to have power, money, or credentials. He asks us to have eyes that see, hands that help, and hearts that don't turn away. Sometimes that's all a miracle needs. She looked at Nia, head thrown back laughing at something Malik said, actually hearing his joke, actually responding with sound. And sometimes, Karina added softly, a miracle in a grocery store aisle changes everything. Behind her, Josiah spoke quietly. Thank you. Not for the first time. Probably not for the last. For seeing her. For not walking away. Karina turned, smiled. Thank you for letting me. Outside, the sun was setting over Atlanta. Inside, 2 children laughed while their broken parents tried to figure out how to build bridges between worlds that should never have met. How to be whole when you'd been shattered. How to trust again when trust had failed you. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was healing. And sometimes that was miracle enough.